The God-fearing, law-abiding citizens of this country have been lied to, and they have been betrayed by their government for over 100 years. The continual efforts to feminize our men, poison our water and our food, and dumb down students and spout propaganda over the public airwaves is just a scratch of a scratch on the surface. What morsels of truth and fact that truthers have known for all the years since that day will finally be brought out into the light of day and forensically proven as empirical fact? How many believers of the official bullshit story will now be forced to wear the tinfoil hats of those who were demonized and ostracized with the CIA weaponized MK-Ultra-inspired moniker, conspiracy theorist? Time will only tell. The facts are irrefutable. The official narrative is preposterous. Among other things, 9/11 was the biggest gold heist in world history. It was the second greatest lie ever told, the first one being told by the serpent in the Garden of Eden when he told Eve, quote, "Ye shall not surely die," end quote. Hello, this is Dave from Net4 Truth USA. It is March 24th, 2019. And I have been up for a while. After that hour and a half or more live stream last night with Stony, I uploaded it to BitChute and both of my primary and secondary TheirTube channels after they took my channel down for uploading a verboten video. Verboten. The video is verboten. You will not upload this video anywhere on the internet. We will put you in jail for 10 years. Malaki on you. 9/11 is a sore spot with me. I lost friends in that disaster. The friends I'm talking about were the manager, president, and several employees of Fiduciary Trust, which occupied the 103rd floor of the South Tower, a place where I was destined to rent a corner office for my business. I had a GPS business, and that's a long story, and Jonah in the belly of the beast is what I felt like when I wasn't where I was supposed to be, and that jumped off. But that's a story for another day and another video, maybe on the radio station that Stony and Stone and I are going to be on in the Midwest. Be that as it may, I was there when the World Trade Center was built. I worked for 15 years on Wall Street and 10 years just across the river. And I had several customers in that building, one of which was the security company that ran the alarms, the fire alarms, and the security for the gold vault that was down in the basements. Nobody really knows, and nobody has ever mentioned this to my knowledge. Maybe there was one or two people on the internet that I can't find them anymore that mentioned that there was more gold in the basement of the World Trade Center than there ever was in Fort Knox. And the only place that possibly had more gold than that is down the street on Maiden Lane, where they have the Federal Reserve Bank. But you can't easily crash a plane into the Federal Reserve Bank. It's only 4 stories tall, and the outer walls are made of granite that are a couple of yards thick. 9/11 was the biggest gold heist in world history, among other things. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey had petitioned the city of New York several times for the demolition of that building, which was full of asbestos when it was built. It had 4-wire twisted pair, a little better than teletype speed internet, that would have cost more to rewire for high-speed internet than it would have cost to build the buildings, because the unions had them by the huevos, you know what I mean? Had them by the huevos. They couldn't get permits to demolish the building. There was more gold in the bottom of that building than Fort Knox ever had. And it was the time that we lost, couldn't keep track of, kind of like let it slip, $21 billion would it be. That was announced the day before. And this building had a lot of problems with tenants, because tenants who needed high-speed internet to conduct their business or be competitive in their business and had 10-year, 20-year leases were moving out, outsourcing their business, their check sorting business, because they could no longer afford to be in that building. Now, let me give you a little background here. You have an IBM 3890 check sorter that I worked on. I was the regional specialist for 3890 check sorters. A bank such as Fiduciary Trust may at any time have $5 or $10 billion in checks that have to be processed through those machines by 3 o'clock. Otherwise, they lose interest on the money. It's the Federal Reserve deadline. If you miss the 3 o'clock deadline, in other words, if you got $10 billion in checks sitting on the check sorter floor and they're not processed by 3 o'clock, you lose a day's interest on that multi-billion-dollar stack of paper that's sitting on the floor waiting to be processed. So they tried everything. They tried buffers. They tried working 24 hours a day. They tried multiple machines, but they couldn't get the speed sufficient enough to meet this deadline. So they outsourced as much of their check processing capacity that they could to another building that was wired with high-speed internet. And that's how I got involved. Okay, it's a long story, but the unions were nuts in that building. If, God forbid, you went in there and took a service call and blew a circuit breaker. Now, I'm not talking about a circuit breaker that goes to an outlet. I'm talking about a circuit breaker that goes to a mainframe, three-phase 440. If you pop that breaker, God forbid, they'd have to get on the phone with the electrical union, and the electrical union would have to call one employee, and they always found some employee out in Port Jefferson, Long Island, 3-hour commute to come in and flip a switch, close the door, and go back. And all the breakers were in a locked closet with a steel door. Okay? They had every business in that building like the mafia. Like the mafia. So they had problems upon problems upon problems. And the intersection of the problems and the opportunity to make this look like a terrorist attack, an excuse to pass the Patriot Act, which was already written, folks, just waiting for an excuse to pass it. If you're worried about people coming over here and taking your freedom, first you ought to worry about the domestic terrorists that are going to be exposed by this lawsuit that Architects for 9/11 Truth is filing against the FBI. The government is corrupt. You cannot trust anything that comes from the government. And if you stand in their way, they will do everything in their power to try to discredit you, just like they did to Brett Kavanaugh, just like they tried to do to President Trump. What is it to take to make a fake web page? 2 seconds. Give this guy $1,000 here. Make a fake web page. Then everybody who's against the government, by the way, the people who don't trust the government are going to the web page to validate some information that's total baloney. Okay? They're going to the government that they don't trust to get information that they rely upon to spout their bullshit stories and their disparagements and their war against truthers, because they're patriots in name only. They pretend to be patriots, but really they're traitors. They're wolves in sheep's clothing, and you know who they are. They know who they are. and I know who you are. Architects for 9/11 Truth has been trying to get the truth out of this controlled demolition for years now. Some family members of those who perished in that disaster had taken payoffs, hush money. And I'm not sure that if I was in that situation that I wouldn't take the money and run either, because you've seen how long it takes for the wheels of justice to turn. And they never would have turned. They never even would have started to turn. People wouldn't even know that justice existed if the oven mitt fashionista made it to the presidency. We would be in World War III right now if the world wouldn't end before then. God bless Donald Trump, and thank you, Jesus, for pulling us out of that one. But now we have learned, since the election started, the 2016 election started, that we really don't have any investigative journalists in the mainstream media. Haven't had investigative journalists in the mainstream media for years. And Jane Stanley of the BBC announced that Building 7 fell 20 minutes before it actually fell. She was standing in New York City. Question 1, what was Jane Stanley from the BBC doing in New York City that day? There was no real news going on up until the planes hit the towers, which is another story. What was she doing there that day? She was waiting for the Foxtrot. And she's standing there in downtown Manhattan, looking into the camera with Building 7 right over her left shoulder, and talking about how it fell, and it's still standing. And that's not an oops, I made a mistake. She's reading from a script. And if she's reading from a script, somebody had advanced knowledge of that building falling. And Larry Silverstein, who bought those buildings just weeks before they were attacked, admitted on TV, we went and pulled the building. Let me tell you something. You just don't get a feather up your ass one day and decide to pull a building. Demolishing a building in a controlled demolition takes months. It takes people studying the structural blueprints of how this thing is built to determine what the best way is to bring it down in its own footprint without damaging buildings around it. And this thing came straight down like a laser. Boom, straight down. The two World Trade Centers that the planes allegedly hit, there really was no planes. It was all CGI. And I covered that in another video that was deleted by their two, but that's okay. It's up there. People got copies of it. It's all over the place. These things that hit the towers didn't hit the towers, because ain't no way a plane's going to hit a tower and the wings that are full of fuel don't come forward. When the plane stops, the wings that are full of really heavy jet fuel come forward, and they would have fell right down on the floor before they even had a chance to go through the building. And if you look at the CNN coverage and you play frame by frame, you can see the left wing of the plane that hit the South Tower goes behind a building that's a quarter of a mile away. How does that happen? You see, you have to use the power of observation. Don't look at what you think you're looking at. Look for the details. Look for the anomalies. And the anomalies point to the fact that that video that was shot by CNN was photoshopped. It was CGI'd. That plane was put in there because it goes through the building, through the outer layer, through 47 steel columns 4 inches thick, and comes out the other side through the other side of the building, the other structural outside of the building, and comes out with the nose intact. Let me tell you something, folks. If sparrows had banjos in their asses, there would be music in the air. And you and I would be dancing a tarandel. It's time that people wake up. The reason these people get away with it and get away with all this stuff is because they do things that are so astronomically unbelievable that people can't wrap their head around it. People in general would rather believe bullshit and be done with it than to spend any mental energy going after the facts. They will spend more energy analyzing what underwear the football player wore when he was in the game in Boston versus how much hair he had on his arms when he played in Seattle. They devote mind-boggling watts of energy trying to machinate this useless statistic that has no bearing on their lives whatsoever. But they won't spend 1 watt of energy, mental energy, to figure out what is going to affect their life and their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives. Oh, it was 50 years ago when they shot President Kennedy. Oh, how can that affect what's today? Well, the same sons of bitches that did that are running the government today. That's how it affects it. What is involved in national security that we can't have every piece of evidence, all the autopsy photos, everything that was done with Kennedy released to the public? What could possibly be an impact on national security that long ago? That's the question that you need to ask. So you can't tell me that this is not true because the facts are there. You can't violate the laws of physics. You can't have anybody who's ever cut down a tree, you got a tree here, okay? And you're chopping at it with an axe. Which way does the tree fall? It falls in the direction of the cut, this way. Does it not? Does it not? Okay. Same thing with a building. You got a building standing, you got a plane hitting it, and you got damage on this side. If it was gonna fall, it would have keeled over in the direction of the damage. The empirical fact is, the scientific fact is that you cannot have a symmetrical collapse with asymmetrical damage. That proves to you right there it is a controlled demolition. And if it is, and I believe it is, and I know it is a controlled demolition, then the question that you have to ask is, who planned the demolition? And how did they escape detection before they took the buildings down? And the answer, I think, should be answered by the architects for 9/11 Truth suing the FBI. And I don't even think the FBI knows all the answers, but they're covering it up. And if you're covering up an assassination of a duly elected president like John F. Kennedy, or you're covering up the mass murder of 3,000 people, you're just as guilty as the people who did it. You should be put up against the wall for treason just the same as they. Believe me, when people find out exactly what happened on 9/11, I might not be around. I might be pushing up cranberries somewhere. But I tell you what, when they find out the people who are alive that are involved in that stuff, what they did to Mussolini would be a cakewalk compared to what is going to happen to them. It's going to be a cakewalk. So, I salute Sean of SGT Report, who put an excellent video out and gave us all permission to download it, duplicate it, and repost it everywhere, because I think it is important for people to see. And I just wanted to add my 2 cents in to validate whatever he said, because whatever he said, what he said is true. What his guests said were true. And just because the American people are so brainwashed and looking at that boob tube that they don't want to believe it. Listen, if you don't want to believe it, there is no amount of evidence that's going to convince you otherwise. But if you have an open mind and you're willing to look at it, and I'll leave the link in the description for a 9/11 playlist that'll blow your socks off. If you have never researched this before. If you approach this with an open mind and don't let the official narrative fool you, you will see that what everybody is telling you about 9/11 is true. And truth, what do you call truth? Truth is when you have enough evidence that it's irrefutable that this is what happened. And they take the opposite of Occam's razor. Occam's razor says the simplest explanation is usually the one that's true. But in this case, the most complex explanation is the one that's true. It's just not 19 Hajis getting on a plane with box cutters and making military-trained pilots fly the planes into the buildings. There were no planes. Those planes were taken out of the sky way before they hit the towers. And all of that stuff was CGI. All the witnesses you saw on the street was Soros-paid trolls. Probably the same kind of trolls that are trolling Stony and myself. But that's okay. They just bring more viewers to the channel. When they get to the channel and look at what we have to say, they find out that the trolls are entirely full of crap. God will figure this out. But until then, we have Architects for 9/11 Truth. We have Judicial Watch. We have an army, a veritable army of investigative journalists who are pooling their resources, who are listening to each other, who are sharing information, and who are posting it on the internet. And you might not want to believe it, but sooner or later, when the empirical evidence comes out, you will have no choice but to switch hats with the conspiracy theorists. This is Dave from Net4 Truth USA. Thank you very much for watching. If you can help us out with a donation, buy a book. The links are down in the description. You'll love it. Take care. Thank you very much. The following video is reposted with permission of SGT Report. Sean gives permission to repost this content at the end of his video.
We'll be able to look into our grandchildren and great-grandchildren's eyes and say, hey, I did everything I could to keep America from going into a dictatorship, a deep state, because that's the kind of place we're heading with increasing numbers of false flag operations such as 9/11, which get covered up by the FBI in order to facilitate a shift in our politics and turning us into a military police state.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here with a most important update, and I'm very gratified to be given the exclusive on this one from my friends over at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and over at the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. I have on the line Richard Gage, David Meiswinkle, and Mick Harrison, and I'm very, very excited about this call. First of all, welcome Richard. Richard, how are you? Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be here again with you with this exciting news from the U.S. Capitol. I'm in the Visitor Center, right under the Capitol, and I'll tell you why.
You know, Richard, you're one of the people who woke up right around the time I did, but you've been moving heaven and earth to try to get the truth out about 9/11. Guys, Richard Gage, AIA, is a San Francisco Bay Area architect and a member of the American Institute of Architects, and he's the founding member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Guys, you know this because we talked to Richard Gage and team back on December 23rd. You can watch that video right now, which YouTube says is not suitable for most advertisers. Truth rarely is on YouTube. That one was called Sea Change, 9/11 Grand Jury to be impaneled. We're going to get an update about that too as well. But let's now welcome David Meiswinkle. David, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back on.
Thank you, Sean. Pleasure, and thanks for having us on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, guys. David has been a licensed attorney in New Jersey since 1989 and practicing criminal defense for over a decade. He's presently the president and a board member of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, a nonprofit organization dedicated to transparency and accountability in government, and that's what we're going to talk about today. David, I'm so excited about this. Now let's welcome Mick. Guys, Mick Harrison is a litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, as well as an attorney in private practice. He's been practicing for 26 years. We've got a great team here today. Mick, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, it's really my pleasure. Guys, who wants to make the big announcement here about the legal action that you're about to take?
Well, why don't we let Mick make that, since he's the attorney that's drafting the complaint, and he is intimately involved with the complaint.
Okay, well, Sean, the short version is that on Monday, we will be filing a lawsuit federal court in Washington, D.C., and the focus will be an order compelling the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, to assess certain key categories of evidence related to 9/11 and to report their assessment to Congress. And that includes primarily the demolition evidence that architects and engineers have worked on for so many years. This addresses several other categories we talk, and the legal theory behind this, which we're happy to unpack for you as well, is that the Congress in 2014 issued a mandate to the FBI to assess any evidence not considered by the original 9/11 Commission in 2004, and this lawsuit is meant to compel the FBI to do that. The FBI did create a commission in 2014, and they looked at some evidence, but they ignored all the demolition evidence and several other categories. So that's the short version.
Hey, Mick, why don't you tilt your camera? There you go. Tilt your camera down so people can see you there. And you were, as fate would have it, just a portion of your beginning statement there got a little jarbled up by Zoom, a little interference. So just repeat that. You're filing this action on Monday, is that right?
Yeah, so the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are joining the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry in filing a lawsuit in federal court in Washington, D.C., and we are seeking an order compelling the Federal Bureau of Investigation to assess the demolition evidence regarding the World Trade Center buildings on 9/11 and several other categories of 9/11 evidence that have never been assessed and reported to Congress by the FBI. And the lawsuit is based on a federal law that Congress passed, which mandates that the FBI do this.
All right. Well, that's very interesting. To those of us who've been following the FBI's practices for any length of time, it may not come as a shock that they didn't properly investigate what happened on 9/11. Richard, it's my understanding that they're mandated to do so. Do you want to talk about the 9/11 Review Commission?
Yeah, this was a commission that Congress formed in order to collect the evidence from the FBI. And the FBI was required to produce a report that included any and all evidence that the 9/11 Commission did not actually see or take into consideration. So one of those pieces of evidence was substantial. In fact, it's our entire documentary on the destruction of the Twin Towers and Building 7 on 9/11. And the FBI wrote back, the Assistant Counter Chief Terrorism, Anti-Terrorism Unit, Michael Heimbach. He wrote back and said, Mr. Gage's, that's me, his research appears to be thorough research and analysis is what it amounted to. And that's available on our website, that letter, at ae911truth.org/FBI. It's that simple. And so very exciting opportunity for us to get our evidence into discovery What we're talking about particularly is the explosive evidence of the destruction of Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper that drops like a rock straight down uniformly, symmetrically in the afternoon of 9/11 after witnesses heard explosions. It drops at free fall acceleration as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. So forgive some of the background noise here. We are, in fact, in the Capitol, U.S. Capitol building, because we never waste an opportunity here. If I'm in town for an exciting press conference that Mick and Dave will be announcing in a minute on Monday, we're going to go and we're going to talk to legislators such as Congressman Mark DeSaulnier, AOC, Oscar Cortez, and Omar, Representative Omar, and many others who we're bringing to their attention the legislative draft legislation, which will call for a new investigation of the destruction of these towers. And we're backed by, of course, the 9/11 family members, including Bob McIlvaine, whose son Bobby died in the tower. So this legislation is named after him, the Bobby McIlvaine Act. So we brought this to their attention today. We'll do it again on Monday, and then we go back to the Bay Area. So I can get into more of this specific evidence in a moment after we hear from Mick and Dave.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Let me ask you, though, before we move on, Richard, kudos to you for having the cojones to walk through the mire, to walk through the muck in D.C. to try to talk to these representatives. You may want to reach out to Devin Nunes, who just filed a $250 million lawsuit against Twitter. Maybe he's finally ready to tackle some truth in regards to 9/11. Do you think you'll be able to find any willing reception of this information by any Congress critter? It just seems like this topic is one that's off limits for the government and has been since day one. You guys have been doing all of the research and investigation NIST should have done. Again, kudos to you, but I don't hold out a lot of hope that these Congress critters or people in the Senate are going to get behind this and help us with a real investigation into what happened on 9/11.
You know, that there may be some precedent already started. Late Walter Jones, he was very instrumental in getting the 28 pages released. And some other people, in Bob Graham, with his initial joint inquiry back in 2002 to start things off. And he's sort of been adamant to get some of this information out. What we're announcing today is very historical. We are basically co-plaintiffs with the architects and engineers, which have been the lead organization for Truth, 9/11 Truth, for the last 10 years. The lawyers committee in the grand jury petition, we packaged a lot of their evidence and put it into before the U.S. attorney in the Southern District in New York. And the grand jury has been the result of that, at least it's our understanding. And we've taken it now a step further. Not only did this complaint, now this is a lawsuit, the grand jury petition was basically a petition. And that was a requirement from them to do what we had asked them to do. But this is something totally different in the regards that we are actually suing the FBI and the Department of Justice, and in particular for the failure to access evidence that should have been presented to the 9/11 Commission. So the evidence, of course, is the ground zero evidence, the destruction of the trade centers through explosive controlled demolitions and bombs. But in addition to that, there is new evidence or new accounts here, some of them that we can talk to you about in detail to the public, and some of them are just, we're still forming them. We know the general areas. So one of the areas that is particular has been evidence regarding people that were celebrating apparently celebrating and documenting the crime as it happened, and were arrested in New Jersey. So that will be a count in there. There will be a count in there about destruction of evidence. And there will be other counts in there, possibly and probably, and our attorney, we're going to defer to Mick on that, having to do with some kind of Saudi connection, also having to do with evidence relating to plane parts, evidence related to cameras, evidence related to witnesses that should have been disclosed. So I will defer to Mick if he wants to go into that area at all, but I just want to underline for the public that this is a first time. It's the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, Architects for Engineers for 9/11 Truth, are co-plaintiffs along with Bob McIlvaine, who is as Richard said, he is the father of Bobby McIlvaine that was killed in the North Tower area. And as we proceed now, we're uncharted territory, and we're trying to get the federal government to do what they're required by law to do.
Before we go back to you, Mick, I want to say a shout out to Bob McIlvaine. Early on, boy, watching so many interviews and his testimony, his heart-wrenching testimony about the loss of his son, who we love so very much. Shout out to Bob. Guys, it's my understanding that most of these 9/11 families took settlements early on from the government, and basically that was hush money, and I don't think Bob McIlvaine ever did, which is why to this day he's able to speak truth and does. So a shout out to Bob McIlvaine. All right, this is very exciting. New evidence. You mentioned new evidence. You also mentioned the fact that there was perhaps people videotaping and documenting this. Now, we know that's true as it relates to what appear to be some Mossad agents, potential Mossad agents, who were arrested and then shipped back to Israel 65, 75 days later, and then they went on a talk show saying our purpose was to document the event.
We are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about even more, things we don't know, Mick?
Well, the people you're talking about are the subject of one of our accounts in this lawsuit. The FBI refers to them as the high fivers, and they did self-identify themselves as Israeli. The focus of this lawsuit is to force the FBI to assess that evidence and report their assessment to Congress. When I say FBI, technically the law requires an external, independent assessment of the evidence to be reported by the FBI to Congress. And that's what we're seeking an order from the federal court to require. To our knowledge, the FBI has never done that, even though we have the FBI reports on the arrest of these high fivers. And as you know, and a lot of folks out there know by now, even though I'm not sure Congress understands it, that these folks were celebrating, strangely enough, the attacks on the World Trade Center, including apparently at the time of the first aircraft attack from the witness interviews I've read. So we're trying to mandate, get an order to mandate the FBI to tell the Congress what their independent external assessment of this evidence is, something which hasn't happened, notwithstanding the passage of 18 years now. So that's a big part of this lawsuit. And I wanted to also just mention that I'm very proud to represent Bob McIlvaine, as well as the Lawyers Committee and AE in this case. And I agree with you, he's been really a stalwart in supporting the truth coming out on this. Very much an admirer of Bob. But let me also note, Sean, that your question to Richard about, is there any real hope of Congress getting involved in a constructive way on this? I think it's a very timely question for this particular lawsuit, because keep in mind, the entire legal basis for this lawsuit is a mandate from Congress. So what we're trying to do is get the FBI to do what Congress has asked them and actually ordered them to do. And one would hope that there would be members of Congress who would support us in requiring the FBI to do what Congress has requested. And that is to inform the FBI, pardon my voice, inform the FBI of their evaluation of this key evidence, and which is long overdue. So I'm actually optimistic that when this lawsuit is filed, we may get one or more members of Congress to explicitly support it.
Well, I hope so. I'm skeptical just merely because of the power of AIPAC and the ADL, and the Congress folks all seem to essentially sign pacts to back Israel. It just seems like there's so much bad news for Israel in the truth about 9/11. Saudi Arabia as well. Who wants to weigh in on the likelihood of this going anywhere? Because look, I'm in your camp, guys. I'm so proud of you guys for doing what needs to be done. You're like Judicial Watch, Tom Fenton over there doing the work that the FBI won't do and the DOJ won't do as it pertains to Clinton emails, Uranium One, Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, phony dossier. You guys are doing the work that NIST and the FBI and the DOJ should be doing but haven't done. So God bless you for this lawsuit.
You know, Sean, the question to me is not is it going to be successful or not. Of course, we all pray it will be successful. The question or the imperative is, should it be done? Must it be done? It hasn't been done. And who's going to do it if we say it should be done? Of course it should be done. Government should be accountable. Government should be transparent. That's all we're asking for. We're asking the government to do what they are supposed to do, what their own laws, what their own legislation has mandated they do. So basically, we're sort of like a watchdog to remind government, hey, parts of you aren't doing the things that you're supposed to do. So I think it's going to be successful. It has a great opportunity, and it never will have an opportunity unless you try it. So we're trying it. So at the same time we're doing this, this is also not only we co-play this with architects and engineers, but we're starting a new fundraising drive to pay for the legal work that's involved in here. So anybody that wants to help and get involved and wants to support what we're doing, if you contact our will be a button on lc4for911.org. You can go on our website, lc4for911.org, and make a contribution. And you can do the same with ae911truth.org. And again, that will go towards financing this operation, this project, this very worthwhile historic project.
Yeah, guys, let's do that. Crowdsource justice here. A lot of people email me and say, how can I help? How can I get involved? And God bless my patrons. I sure do appreciate you guys. You're keeping me in the game as the rules are changed in the middle of the game with these algorithm changes and the social media giant crackdowns on truth. But let's get behind this. If we could get 10,000 of y'all, and by the way, guys, I have the most generous audience in the world. They're just wonderful people. If 10,000 of y'all would go over there, and I'll leave the link below this, click the donate button and pitch in $5. Pitch in $10. There's no reason we can't raise $100,000 for this effort. So I'll put that link below this video in the more info section. Richard, God bless you, man. You've been at this for as long as I can remember. I just don't know how you do it day in and day out. Where do you find the passion to continue? I guess you guys are pushing a boulder up a mountain, and you are to be applauded for it. Because, Richard, honestly, man, if it weren't for you dropping everything, changing your life, and founding AE 911 Truth, architects and engineers for 911 Truth, I don't think we'd be here right now having this conversation. I know you and I wouldn't, but I don't think I'd be here with David Meiswinkle and Mick Harrison either.
No, we've assembled the evidence, Sean, over the last dozen years since I first heard David Ray Griffin on the radio. Driving my van back to the office, I was just stunned to hear the kind of information and eyewitnesses of explosions before the towers ever collapsed. This is what the FBI has not reported to the 9/11 Review Commission. And this is what the 9/11 never appeared in the original 9/11 Commission report. The American people have been lied to, and more importantly, I've been lied to, right? I got really, really angry when I realized that this is the scam of the century, the crime of the century, and it's been unprosecuted. And this was 12 years ago. So I still seem to have the same passion that I had. And thank God the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry has now come about. Come about. I mean, they've got formed, and Mick has put so much work and all of the lawyers over there into this lawsuit against the FBI, forcing them to put this information into an amended report. And we're talking hundreds of hours. So we're raising funds for that effort, and that is why your generous audience needs to come to assist us in this vital effort. I mean, we're trying to turn the tide here. We've got a petition, as has been mentioned, to the U.S. attorney, and he's looked at the evidence. He's agreed to impanel a grand jury, a special grand jury. They're looking at this evidence too. So now the Congress will be looking at this evidence. And that will support later on our legislative effort, draft legislation, which is the Bobby McIlvaine Act. So it all goes hand in hand. And you say, what are the chances? I say it doesn't matter, like Dave, what the chances are. If there's any chance, this is going to be it. B, if we're not going to be listened to by these Congress critters, as you call them, we're holding them accountable historically, karmically. This is an accountability procedure. We're doing our due diligence to hold their feet to the fire. And if all else fails, we will have done our part. We'll be able to look into our grandchildren and great-grandchildren's eyes and say, hey, I did everything I could to keep America from going into a dictatorship, a deep state, because that's the kind of place we're heading with increasing numbers of false flag operations such as 9/11, which get covered up by the FBI in order to facilitate a shift in our politics and turning us into a military police state. We don't want that, Sean. We're doing everything we can.
You know, it occurs to me that as we're having this conversation, you know, I mentioned that the social media giants and Google and YouTube are changing their algorithms at the behest of the mainstream media, by the way, to filter out what they're calling misinformation. And it just strikes me that within that category of misinformation, subjects that they consider misinformation, is 9/11 truth. David, let's go back to you, and maybe you could give us the one smoking gun of 9/11 that people might not know about. Give us your favorite smoking gun of 9/11. Mine's World Trade Center 7 falling at free fall speed, and the BBC reporting about it 20 minutes early.
Well, that's certainly, there's so many smoking guns there. I mean, that's the main one we think of, Building 7, being announced that it was already down 20 minutes before it even came down. Certainly looks like some kind of a, I don't say black op, but somebody had some insider information to be able to do that. But that's what it appears to be. But there are so many, from common sense, if you look and study the how the buildings go down, it becomes very obvious as there's explosions involved. When you learn a little bit about resistance and how the building is really actually built from the bottom up, and how the top could not force it down like that. When you look at pulverized concrete like it was, inches deep, when you see molten metal that can only burn at very high temperatures, far in excess of anything that office fires caused by jet fuel could cause. That's just some of them. When you hear 118 firemen say they experienced explosives, and you don't see that even mentioned in the 9/11 reports or included in the investigation, and see the firemen actually be written out of history for the great sacrifice they made, and in particular brothers that had heard basically something that would lead to another theory that office fires, which is the government's theory, brought the building down, which is totally ridiculous. It's what our whole history is built on. It's what Richard's talking about as far as this rollback of all our constitutional rights in reference to our Bill of Rights. So I think, too, what's really good about this suit here, and we focus on thus far on the ground zero evidence is the strongest evidence, but basically this asks for an assessment by the FBI of other areas, whether it be the high fivers, whether it be Pentagon cameras that basically the public doesn't know, or the 9/11 Commission wasn't advised of. If it has to do with plane parts, and that for our audience, that plane parts that have serial numbers, and for all the different crime scenes, the plane part numbers, if we're looking at evidence reference to that should have been assessed and presented. When we have to do with financing or maybe connections to Saudi government, etc. These are all areas that are expansive. They all are connected. There's a way to connect the dots eventually. This is only one step towards doing that, and all we're doing is asking the government to do their job. So as you ask for smoking guns, listen, when I first got into this, it's a slippery slope everywhere. Everywhere you put your hand, you slip. If you're climbing it and you put your foot, you slip. There is nothing truthful, it seems, from my perspective, and this is, I'm talking individually now, we haven't decided this as the lawyers committee, what I'm saying at this moment, But my personal opinion, I think most of the people would agree, is that, as I said, it's a slippery slope. There's truth is hard to find in the official agenda here, our official regimen of what's been put out there. So we're, in a sense, rewriting history. That has to be done. We're interested in truth. We're interested in justice. And you mentioned Bob McIlvaine lost a son. 3,000 people lost their loved ones at that day. But we all lost the heart and soul of our country that day. We want to get it back, and we will get it back.
Amen. Mick, final word from you, and thank you so much for getting involved in filing this lawsuit. It's so very exciting. We'll get you guys back on with updates as necessary. So Mick, a final word from you, and then we'll hear from Richard Gage again.
Well, I think the key for your audience to understand about this lawsuit is the purpose is to force the FBI to assess evidence regarding 9/11 and disclose that to Congress, and by doing that, to the American people. This lawsuit is not about a particular theory of what that evidence means. It's about the right of the Congress and the American people to know what that evidence is, and to have the FBI and its own experts and an external panel tell the Congress what they think this evidence means. So that's the key. It's a right to know sort of lawsuit, and it's based on a congressional mandate, which we do hope that the Congress will come around to support us on, because we're attempting to force the FBI to do what Congress has ordered them to do. So that's the gist.
All right. Well, it's patriots like you guys that are going to keep this thing alive until we get justice, come hell or high water. I want to say one thing before we go, and we'll throw it back to Richard here. Matthew 10:26. I'm going to read this from the New Living Translation. I usually do King James, but I like this particular take on it. But don't be afraid of those who threaten you, for the time is coming when everything that is covered will be revealed, and all that is secret will be made known to all. You guys are helping us get there. Richard, final word from you.
Yes, well, the FBI has already assessed the evidence of AE 9/11 truth, and they say that it's backed by thorough research and analysis. So they're going to be compelled to include such a recommendation assessment to Congress in an amended report. So we're very excited to get some, to force the FBI to be truthful in this matter. So I just once again want to encourage everybody to donate to the at lc4911.org or at ae911truth.org/FBI. This is a huge turning point, just like the impanelment of a special grand jury. So we're very excited at AE 9/11 Truth, and thanks for the opportunity, Sean, to bring this information to your audience.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And guys, everybody listening right now can be a part of this incredible time, this incredible moment in history where we the people stand together with these fine gentlemen, these three patriots, and we the people help back this to get to the justice, to get the justice and seek the justice and find the justice that we all so deserve. And of course, the justice that Bob McIlvaine's son deserves. May his soul rest in peace. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for your time. I very much appreciate it. David Meiswinkle, Richard Gage, and Mick Harrison. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. And guys, thank you so much. Spread this far and wide. You have my permission to rip this, download it, and re-upload it. I don't do that hardly ever with my videos. You can do it with this one. It's that important. And guess what, guys? Truth is not suitable for most advertisers on YouTube. Let that sink in. All right, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And we'll get you back on as soon as you want to come back on with further updates.
Thank you.
Very much. Right.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. And friends, for real news 24/7, do visit us at sgtreport.com. God bless. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.